Okay, good evening. Thank you for attending this meeting of the Governance Committee on Tuesday, the 23rd of May, 2023. Before we start, the usual outline of housekeeping rules. There are no planned fire alarms, so if it does sound, run or leave via the emergency exits. Can I request that all mobile phones are turned off or on silent? And we'll do some introductions because there are some new faces here. So I'll start with councillors, starting with a brief introduction.
Hello everyone, my name's Councillor Peter Gabbett. I'm new on the council, but I was previously a cabinet member across at neighbouring Council Chorley.
Pete Pellinger, I was elected to Buckshore and Worden. Wasn't expecting to be here about 3 months ago, but life's good.
Hi, good evening everyone. Councillor Ange Turner.
Councillor Damien Bretherton from representing Walton Liddell West.
Thank you. And officers, please. I forgot that.
It's all right. Councillor Wesley Roberts, Buckshore and Worden. Thanks.
Louise Mattinson, I'm Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer.
Chris Moister, Director of Governance and Monitoring Officer.
Dawn Highton, Head of Audit and Risk.
Georgia Jones, I'm a Director at Grant Thornton and I'm the Engagement Lead as the External Auditors for the Council.
Jean Waddington, Principal Financial Accountant.
Barry Elder, Head of Neighbourhoods and Waste.
Jackie Murray, Senior Auditor.
Ruth Remington Clark.
Thank you very much for that. Some familiar faces. I was going to say old guard. That probably wouldn't be kind to say old guard. Yes, we've got some stalwarts with us. And nice to see you back, Ange, on a proper committee after your brief sojourn elsewhere. Okie dokie. Okay. Members of the committee attending in person here at the Civic Centre. Other members of council may also dial into via Teams. I don't think there's any up there, is there? Oh, via Teams. Okay. What else have we got? Could I remind members to unmute themselves once they have finished speaking to enable the meeting to proceed smoothly? Have we got any apologies?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interests to declare? No declarations of interest. Okay, we'll start then with item 3, which minutes of the last meeting. I have the minutes of the last meeting in front of me for approval. Are there any points of accuracy on the minutes, or can we propose the minutes for approval?
You can go first. You go.
Yeah. Okay, it's just on page 5. If you look at the third paragraph up, it says, in response to a query was raised as to the number of residential properties not recycling correctly, ASIM agreed to provide the information outside the meeting. I'm just wondering if anybody's seen any information, because I haven't received it. And it's similar to page 6, second paragraph down. There was a number of queries in relation to actions 10, 14 and 15, which were due March 2023, May 23, arising from a query relating to reporting of near misses before and after insourcing the service. ASIM undertook to provide additional information after the meeting. So I'm just wondering, those 2 particular items I picked up. Unfortunately, I've not received the information. I just want clarification that the information has been issued. And if I can have sight of it, please.
Chris,
Chair, unfortunately, I can't confirm one way or the other whether the information is provided. I will chase that up with that directorate. Unfortunately, the director is on leave at present, but I'll speak to one of the heads of service and make sure the information is provided to committee this week.
There's a couple of things, Mr. Chairman, as regards page 3, attendance.
Councillor Phil Smith was here and is not recorded.
Okay, can we correct that, please?
Following on from what Mr. Moisture has just said, also on page 5, with regard to the procurement of CCTV, the commercial discussions were coming to an end in March, and Mr. Khan intended to provide us with a further update, which I haven't received. Likewise, further up the page, it talks about the approximate savings on the waste, and the exact figure would be confirmed after the meeting. Still waiting for that. And also, I think that was it on those. So there was a number of things that are supposed to have been sent out after the meeting, and we're still awaiting them. Thank you.
Can we add to those are the list of things where that's in?
Absolutely, Chair. Similarly, I'll raise it with the Directorate and get that.
Okay, well, apart from those items, can we have a proposer for the minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you. And a seconder?
I'm second that.
Thank you. And are we all do we all approve it? Yeah. There's only 3 of us here that can actually, so we'll say that's approved. Thank you. Okay. Moving on. Item 4, SIPFA Resilience Index. And I believe it's Jean who's going to deliver this for us.
Yes, thank you. So you'll have the full details, I believe, in the reports pack meeting. So this is a brief overview, but obviously any questions welcome as well.
Sorry, Jean, I can just stop you for a sec.
Sorry, is that me? Am I too quiet to sit closer? Try again. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so the Resilience Index is an annual index compiled by SIPFA. It shows the council's position on a range of measures which are selected by SIPFA and they're associated with financial risk. The idea behind it is to provide assurance of financial health of the council, possibly highlight any weaknesses or opportunities. But it also, you'll see in the pack, there's a comparator group which is updated annually, and it compares the council with similar authorities, and it's based on social and demographic factors. So there are 8 indicators that are applicable to South Ribble. So I'll just go through those briefly. The first one is reserve sustainability. This is a measure of how long the authority's reserves will last if they continue in drawing down on them at the same rate. The measure is capped at 100, and you'll see that South Ribble has the maximum score there, so that's positive. The next one is the level of reserves. This is the ratio of the current level of reserves to the net revenue expenditure, and the lower the level, the higher the risk. The strong performance here, 125% of annual spend at South Ribble, and it's got the 5th highest level of reserves of 12 Lancashire districts. The third one is the change in reserves. So this is a percentage measure with negative changes implying higher risk. But you can see here that the reserves have consistently grown, which is positive in comparison to some of the others within the group who've seen their reserves decline. The next 2 are on interest and debt, and South Ribble is currently debt free, and so there's no interest payable. Next is fees and charges. Excuse me, and this is the total fees and charges as a proportion of service expenditure. Obviously, the higher the fees and charges, the increase of resilience, so it gives more control over budgets. Next is the council tax. This is a ratio of council tax as a proportion of net revenue expenditure. This is one where South Ribble's at the lower end of the chart this year, probably due to freezes of council tax in recent years. And the last one is business rate growth, which is a percentage of growth in business rates above the baseline. South Ribble's the highest level of growth in the group, I think for the second year. And this year it's due to a range of smaller sites rather than one big development. There's a Costa Coffee at Walton Le Dale, Home Bargains, and the gym at Leyland as a couple of examples. So all in all, it's the report as a whole, it just gives independent insurance so the council's in a strong position, and it provides sort of consistency in timing and reporting year on year, reporting on the same indicators, and that sort of with the comparator group as well. So that's basically it in a nutshell. But happy to try and answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Jeannie. Well, on that committee then, anybody have any questions on this one? Damien?
It's more of an observation. I noticed from the charts, it shows that the reserves are in decline, and the level and range of charges are lower than usual, and that's put an increasingly more reliance on government funding. And there's obviously a missed opportunity cost there, because as the reserves has fallen, we're earning less interest on the cash, and interest rates have gone up. I noticed there has been a freeze on the amount of income coming in through the council tax. So I'm just wondering if going forward it would be a good idea to look for more income opportunities, because we're in a situation where reserves are continuously in decline, and we don't seem to be taking advantage of the charges, the fees and charges, which we could look to increase. And page 18 summary just says we're increasingly more reliant on government funding. It would be nice to not rely on government funding too much and try and look for more income sources. Thank you.
Would you like to come back, Jeannie?
I mean, it's a valid point, and I think one of the things that that's in the notes is that possibly that it is it's an opportunity for income generation to increase with the fees and charges. So I think that's already been noted and is there on the cards for discussion.
Okay, then. Any other questions on this item, Peter?
Sorry, just through you, Chair. As Councillor Bretherton there is saying that the reserves have decreased. Can you just point out where that is in the report? On the graph, it says that we're growing just at a reduced rate of growth. And it says other authorities in the group are seeing the reserves decline, not us. So I just want to clarify if that's the case.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Any questions from anybody not on committee? And there's nobody from the public here anyway, is there? So this one is just for noting. We'll note that, thank you. Okay, item 5, management response to external audit planning inquiries. Louise?
Thank you, Chair. So this paper details the response that we have provided through to Grant Thornton in relation to their audit planning, as they need to establish the risk of fraud and error and have questions around the assumptions and estimates that we have based our figures in the accounts on, that the audit will commence on shortly. So it's looking at estimates, the methodologies of those and the basis of those. The paper is broken down. There's general inquiries, there's inquiries made of fraud and risk assessment, looking at what policies we have in place, what training we have for members of staff, what controls, etc., around the risk of fraud, and the impact that we've seen over the last financial year, 22-23, in any changes in legislation and in regulations. It also asks for information about any related parties that we may have that might be between the council and another body. So, for example, the shared services arrangement, and also in relation to individual members of the council or directors of the council. So again, looking at any opportunities or examples of which there might be the potential for undue influence to be exerted. It also asks us questions around going concern. Do we believe that the council is in a position to continue operating into the future, and seeks assurances on what basis we've reached those judgments, and then more information around significant accounting estimates that we would include in the accounts. So specifically, really around the pensions numbers, the assumptions that are involved in calculating the value of the assets of the pension fund and of the liabilities of the pension fund. Also around the valuation of buildings, which again is subjective, and for which we employ valuers to assist us with that. That's all information that's provided to them to assist in their audit planning, and around bad debts, provisions and appeals, etc. So all of the questions that are listed there, we've provided information, and obviously as the audit progresses there will be requests for more information and more, and we will provide that in due course. But happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Louise. And on that note, do we have any questions? None?
Might as well ask one. Thank you, Chair. It's on page 60.
No, you won't.
Sorry, do apologise.
Okay, that's no problem. No questions from anybody else on the committee? Any questions from anybody not on the committee? I could just say any questions from Phil, really, couldn't I? Okay, this item is for decision, isn't it? Yeah, it's for decision. Could I have a proposal and a seconder, please? Yep. And are we all in favour of accepting the report? Yeah. Thank you. Done. Good. Moving on, internal audit, annual report and opinion. And I believe this is Dawn's turn. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you said, this is our internal audit annual report and opinion. The annual opinion is a requirement of the both the accounts and audit regulations and also the public sector internal audit standards. And the purpose of it is to provide an opinion from myself on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the organisation's governance, risk management and control environment. So if I just take you through aspects of the report, the council has established a three lines of defence model, and the diagram on paragraph 5 clearly shows where internal audits sit within those 3 lines of defence. In that the shared management team and directors and heads of service are solely responsible for ensuring that there's a strong control environment operating within the council, and then the second line of defence and the third line of defence contest that and challenge and monitor it. Us being the third line of defence provides that independent assurance alongside external audit as well. If I can continue through the report, in order to provide an opinion, we have to ensure that there is sufficient coverage of the whole authority to be able to form an opinion that's reflective of the authority. So at paragraph 12 and 13, we've set out how the plan that was approved by the committee in both March last year and September, the 2 6-month plans, how that coverage has been established. And it shows that we include every directorate within our plan so that the coverage is complete. We then go on to explain what work has been carried out in terms of the planned work. And we've included there at paragraph 15 the whole range of reviews that we've carried out and the assurance rating that's been awarded to each. Now, members who've been on the committee for the past 12 months will be aware that we've had a number of limited reports this year, and I've included some further detail about each of those reviews and the weaknesses identified within them. There are 2 new reports, which we've also attached as appendices to this report, which is the Water Management Review and the GDPR. And we have officers in attendance who are able to answer any specific questions that you may have about those particular reviews. We don't just need to rely on work that gives an assurance rating to be able to form our opinion. We can also rely on work that we do as part of groups. So you can see I'm a member of the senior leadership team. I'm a member of the corporate governance group. All the information that feeds into these groups, we can place reliance on and used when we're forming our opinion. And I've also put in there about the details that we are members of NAFN and NFI, so we're aware of what's going on in the fraud world as well. Full details of all the work that we've carried out over the course of the year is included at Appendix B, with a summary of each review and the findings of each individual review. We have had to defer one review due to the loss of key personnel. It was literally impractical to carry out the review at that point in time, but that will be carried forward into the risk assessment when we're planning again for next year, for the second half of the year. And we've also got 2 IT reviews. So we've got the vulnerability management, which is only due to commence in June. And we've got an ICT support review, which is currently in progress. We don't have the skills in-house to be able to carry out ICT reviews ourselves, so we're solely reliant on auditors coming in from an external source, and they weren't available at the time we needed them, so we've had to just delay that work slightly. In paragraph 27, what we've tried to do is demonstrate the direction of travel, really, in terms of the past 2 years, how the levels of assurance are looking. And as you can see, it's a broadly consistent picture in terms of the number of reviews that we've carried out and the ratings that have been awarded. Due to COVID and the impacts that had on the audit service, it's only really the past two years that provides us with that meaningful data. But as each year continues and goes by, we'll be able to build up that picture. As you're aware, when we complete our reviews, we agree management actions to strengthen that control environment. And those actions we monitor for implementation. We do have a 90% rate for implementation, and we're currently operating at 64% for South Ribble. And for any reviews that are considered to be shared with Chorley, we have an 80% implementation rate. Now, we as we're aware, it's lower than we'd like. We have done a considerable amount of work to look at where those actions are and what's been taken to address them. We're working very, very closely, as I've alluded to earlier, with the Commercial Directorate. And a large proportion of those actions do relate to that particular directorate. However, what I will say is we can see progress with the implementation of those actions. So as I mentioned earlier, the opinion that we have to give is on risk management, governance and internal control. So if I can move on to risk management, it's not bespoke in as much as it's unique in itself. When we do audit reviews, we consider risk management and how we're managing the risks within. So there is overlap. However, we use the Institute of Internal Auditors risk maturity model to assess where we are as an authority in terms of risk management. And over the past 2 years, we have made significant progress in embedding risk management processes. As I've highlighted in paragraph 30, that there's a lot of work being done. And it was our view that at the moment, the council risk management maturity is largely risk defined. You will see on the AGS that's to come later on in the agenda, we have put a further action in about how we can strengthen this further so that we become risk managed. Again, in terms of corporate governance, we do a significant piece of work to assess the council's arrangements against SIP for delivering good governance in local government framework. And our assessment is detailed on page 34, paragraph 34. Again, any actions arising from that review have been included within the annual governance statement. When forming the opinion, we can also rely on other sources of assurance, and I've listed some there that we've health and safety sits within my own service, so I'm fully aware of the steps that are being taken to strengthen those arrangements. Similarly, with insurance, we've got a good level of knowledge about how we're managing our insurable risks. We can also take the assurance from other providers, and I've included some examples of work that we can place reliance on and include when we're forming our opinion. As you're aware, we've also carried out some work for South Ribble Leisure, and again we will feed this opinion back to the board of directors. But South Ribble Leisure use a lot of the council processes, so it's relevant to this committee as well, that the opinion we form of that. And again, we're going to give an adequate opinion of that. So again, overall, the way we formed our opinion this year is we've tried to take an overall view of the arrangements, and it is accepted that we have found some areas of significant weakness this year. However, we don't feel that it's replicated throughout the whole authority. So we felt it was fair to say that we thought I feel that the arrangements in place are adequate, but with the exception of those specific areas that we've highlighted and which are detailed in paragraphs 17 to 21. The report goes on to say how we comply with the public sector internal audit standards, and it also gives details about our own performance. In terms of looking forward, the council has recently recruited a significant number of new heads of service, which we can work closely with to drive the improvements that we've identified, and others that have also been identified. And we're hopeful that the next 12 months will be less contentious and more stable. But yeah, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dawn, for a very comprehensive report. I think we might have some questions on this one for sure. Would you like to go first, Mark?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Dawn. It was a very comprehensive report, and I think the actual overall report for the year has done it justice, because there has been some significant problems, as we know, throughout the year. And I think what highlighted it to me again is the last two that have just come, the water and the GDPRE one, whatever it's called. I always get them muddled up. That they are limited again. And we go back to this situation of this line of defence, as you started off by saying, we have the line of defence, which is senior management. It's the first line of defence. And when you read these reports and you go through them, the one thing that seems to come out is that there is a serious lack of control at that management level. And that's where the weaknesses seem to be. The overall picture to me is that there is difficulties with that corporate structure in that corporate directorate, and that's where most of the problems seem to lie at the moment. What really concerns me about a lot of these, I think when we did the waste management one a couple of months ago, where there was some really serious problems of operatives working long hours, and their health and safety was being compromised. That seems to come through to me again on the water one, where there's obviously, particularly Penwitham Reservoir, You know, there's a lot of money was put into that at the beginning when we took that over £500,000, you know, and we're still looking at what we should do to safeguard our residents, because that's really a health and safety issue on that particular one. There's a lot of things that seem to be, it seems that the systems are there. I think we discussed this afternoon, didn't we? The systems are there. But somehow we seem to be bypassing some of them somehow. You know, the lack of records being kept properly is such a fundamental thing. You know, the lack of records of how people have been trained is not being listed properly. So we don't know whether they've been trained. So I suppose what I'm getting to at the end of the day is, how are we going to address this fundamental problem that seems to be there with the senior management? I know we've had some new staff in, but this seems to be higher up than that to me. Whether I'm reading it wrong, I don't know, but that's how these reports are coming across to me. So I don't know whether you have any comment about that at all.
From my point of view, I think, as I put in the report there, I think the heads of service will be key in driving the improvements forward. They're the people who we'll be working closely with to make sure the actions are implemented. There has been gaps, and I think that's acknowledged in that structure. But I think now it's filled. Now the structure's filled. I think we'll be, like I said, I think we'll be in a much more stable position and be able to get those improvements in place at quite a pace as well, I feel as well. So I think you will see a differing picture over the next 12 months.
I think the other thing that really concerns me is the adherence to the actions. You know, we're only at 64% here. Chorley's a little bit better on shared services, they're at 80%, but 64% is not good at all. And these actions are actions that have been put in place to make sure that we improve. So how are we going to manage to drive that forward?
If I can just give you a little bit of assurance about that as well. So that was the position at the end of March. We are monitoring this more or less on a month by month and week by week basis. And if I were to calculate it again, I'm confident, I haven't done it in its entirety, but I've looked at different directorates. I think we'd be more than like 75, 80% as at today. So it is definitely creeping up.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to provide some support to what Dawn was saying, I think the question about how we're going to embed this is around improving the monitoring arrangements that are taking place. So some of the structures that we're reintroducing or re-establishing, such as the Information Security Council, which is being re-established to support the monitoring of GDPR compliance, the drafting of the how we're doing the reporting lines into the corporate governance group, and ensuring that the senior leadership team, who are made up of directors of and heads of service, know what they're expected to do and have that level of reporting. And you mentioned training as well. The implementation of the Learning Hub, which has only really come in the last 12 months, is a full record of all the training so not only the training that the council deliver, you can upload into it records of external training that's been given as well. So we're in a far better position to track the training and monitor the training that's been given to staff, and particularly around the mandatory training. Reports can be run off that system, and in fact there's a direct dashboard available to all managers for their direct reports as to their completion rates and performance on completing the mandatory training. So part of the way we're looking to manage this is improving the information that managers get to make sure that they're in a position to drive through these changes. So that's why I completely agree with Dawn that I think you will see a marked improvement in the next 6 months on performance, because we're giving people the information needed in order to manage it properly.
Does that help give you a little more assurance here?
I think the next 6 months I will wait and see, and we can all judge for ourselves then how things are going. I mean, I'm sure that we were saying this afternoon about training, and everyone who's been on the governance has now been to training. I bet that's all. That'll all be marked down in somebody's little red book somewhere, as is all when we all come to our equality training. Somebody will have ticked a box that I've been. It seems so simple that you tick, that you're checking who's trained and who's not. So I will wait. I'm sure I'll still be here I hope I'll still be here in the next 6 months anyway. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. When do we next look at this?
We bring different elements of it back throughout the year. So the management action performance, I think we've agreed to report in year. Go on, Dawn.
So the next progress report will come back to the committee in September, and that will be against the plan that was approved in March.
Thank you. Amy, do you want to?
Yeah. So again, I'd like to thank Dawn for a very good report. I remember a few meetings ago we discussed the issue of utilities management, where the properties, how they were being managed. And it does mention in this report the non-compliance of regulations, for example, gas and electrical safety certificates, and utility bills that weren't being paid, utility bills that were being paid when they shouldn't have been paid on empty properties. And the whole thing was a mess. And at the time, it was quite shocking to read. And I asked the question, is there nobody, in the private sector, you'd have someone managing properties and making sure all these things were being managed properly. And I asked the question, and I think there was a vacancy, or we were going to recruit somebody. So the first question is, have we got somebody in place now that's actually managing properties, like you will get, in the private sector, and also the asset register. There's some comments made about duplication of valuations of buildings and that kind of thing, and the frequency that we value properties. Have we got a live asset register? For example, can members of the public go onto our website and see the assets that we own and the values of them? That would be quite useful to know. And also, am I right in thinking that the the property assets are valued every 5 years, or because on a rolling basis? Because the property values go up and down. I should suspect now that interest rates are what they are. I would have thought valuations of properties would be slightly lower than they were, say, 2 years ago. So how frequently are we updating that live asset registry, if we've got one, and is it available for the members of the public to see? Thank you.
Thank you.
So in answer to the question, absolutely, yes, we do have an asset register. No, it's not published on a website or accessible. It is something that is subject to audit and is extensively audited every single year. Valuations are undertaken on the properties once every 5 years, and it is done on a cyclical basis. On investment properties is undertaken every single year, and because of the issue that was identified last year, where we included some component parts as an asset, but then also included them in the overall value of the building, we've asked for certain assets to be valued again to just ensure that we've got the. Yeah, so we probably included more assets into the valuation this year than we needed to, but again, it brings it up to date. But so yes, we do, and but no, it's not something that's published. It's more of a live a live tool. As expenditure is incurred on capital schemes, we are constantly updating the value of the assets, their assets under construction.
So have we ever thought about having it on the website where we can see, taxpayers can see where the money is in the land and buildings and the current values?
So the accounts are obviously on the website and they are published every year. They are audited, and there's extensive notes within there, which segments all of the different types of assets that we have, and the method of valuation, information on there. But actually the asset register itself is a huge list of many different, it's not just individual properties, it could be component parts, roofs, elements of swimming pool, for example, could all be listed separately. So it's not something that is a requirement, and I don't think we've ever thought about putting it there, because, as I say, it's a live document. As invoices come in for certain schemes that we're building, we would be building that up over the course of the year.
Yeah, and are we now confident that all the assets are registered on the asset register? Because I think at one point we were unsure if things were missing and that type of situation.
Yep, we have no reason to believe that they are not fully accounted for, and what we were doing was trying to streamline. I think there was an issue in terms of the valuations where sometimes properties or elements of properties were called something slightly different, and so we've done an exercise this year of going through and making sure that the references are tidied up, so it's very, very explicit what component parts are related to what assets, so it's a lot easier and much more streamlined.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I was asking about the manager. Have we got somebody in place now? Thank you.
Yes, we absolutely do. We have 2 new heads of service. They're also part of the Commercial Directorate Development Group. Our management actions are one of the key things that we focus on within that group, the implementation of actions.
Thank you.
Councillor Turner, did you want to speak? Any other questions?
I was going to ask, when I looked through the water bodies report and kept seeing things that needed doing, it just made me wonder who was going to do that and whether there's any questions of our capacity to do things within the system that we've got.
Yes, that would be me. Yeah, so if you look on the right hand column, my name's against every action through the water policy. So there's a few on there, obviously, to get through. I don't know if we're going to go through it in more detail in a little while, but yes, I wouldn't profess to be an open water expert, but I understand health and safety. And I think the way that we've set out the actions hopefully gives some structure and some urgency where it's needed to be able to turn this round, hopefully quite quickly, and hopefully ahead of schedule if we can.
Thanks, Chair. I can tell I enjoyed reading this report, Dawn, because my notes are the most comprehensive on my iPad, and it wasn't just the colours or the diagrams. So first off, I just wanted to say thanks, and then I was really pleased to see we got substantial on safeguarding. I think it's just really important for every organisation. So, well done to everyone in the organisation who's played that role in that. I think I'm not going to go into too much detail on kind of the way services, water management, GDPR. But I think the one thing that I found quite telling of the culture of the organisation, being relatively new to the inside of it, is that we're an organisation that sometimes puts our hands up and say there's always room for improvement, but we don't hide things, and we don't try and scare away from. We get an action plan together and we try and improve it. So I really thought that shined through in the report. 2 questions I was going to ask, Chair, if you don't mind, by yourself, is what timescales are the Commercial Directorate Development Group working to in terms of improving compliance? and the second one was just when are we anticipating conducting the review of community infrastructure levy, because I saw that had been carried over. But thank you very much.
So in terms of the community commercial director development group, when I said it, I thought that doesn't sound right. The commercial director development group, we meet fortnightly, and it's literally we're looking for progress at every single meeting. So there isn't set timescales of what we're looking to achieve. It's we're monitoring progress, and if things aren't moving quickly enough, then steps are taken to address that. And in terms of the community infrastructure levy, we will feed that back into our risk assessment when we carry out the planning stages for the plan for the next 6 months, and we start that process in August. So it depends literally the state of play at that point in time, and how much resource we have and what the level of risk is as to whether. So I can't say definitely it will be feature, but it will definitely be considered again in August.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Are we going to discuss the water separately, or is it part of this?
Question, are we doing it now? Part of this, yeah? And that would be Barry, wouldn't it?
Would you like to just fire questions at me, or do you want me to just give you a bit of a handle as to the way I see it?
I think we'll start with a bit of a handle how you see it.
Okay, so thank you. It's basically got three themes the way that I see it, and the actions support the following of those themes and what's realistic. So regrettably, the starting point is that there's no policy for open water at all. Never has been one to my knowledge. So that would ordinarily be the starting point of where your procedures and your inspection frequencies come from. So the first action, the most immediate action, essentially, is to that policy needs to be introduced from scratch. We can refer to other policies, plenty of other policies online, so we can throw a policy together, if you like. But my preference would be that we go to town on it effectively. And then there are a number of procedures and routines that we have that are known but aren't documented, such as what an inspection frequency looks like, what an inspection frequency would involve, what the knowledge of the officer undertaking the inspection would look like, and where would we have a record of that saying that that is adequate, and that would lead back to the policy. And then there are some other elements that are with the best of intentions, particularly around our volunteering activities. So Longton Brickcrofts is mentioned in there with one of our officers that operates from there. An element of trying to do the right thing and having, for example, written risk assessment, so like a point of work risk assessment, for example, for events that might be undertaken. And this report really is looking for those kind of assessments to be more visible in the event that the person undertaking them carries one out. The person then that has undertaken it is not around, someone else can pick up the baton. So our volunteer policy, some of the quicker wins and quicker fixes around loan working and volunteer activity, which is we need to get a grip of quite quickly, I think are quite quick wins. Hence why I've got about a week to do that one for May, and then the rest are sort of spread out. So the policy, for example, will be drafted quite quickly, but there's an understanding there that it will take a while for a brand new policy to go through the various levels of governance, if you like, until we can actually implement it. And ultimately, I can only start to write the proper procedures and look at the inspection frequencies from that. So hopefully I'll get a handle and can make a start beforehand, but that's where I'm going for me.
Thank you for that. It sounds like you were given a blank canvas there. Did you want to ask a question?
Thank you for that report. I just want to ask a question about the water. We're looking at open water. I'm thinking of my ward, for example, at Walton-le-Dale West. We've got what used to be ponds, etc., that are fenced off with life buoys, and we've also got areas that are not fenced off, the no signs and no life buoys, and we've also got areas where 20 years ago a site was developed and a pond was retained by the developer, for example, which is just an open pond with no signs there at all. I'm not too sure who owns that pond. I suspect it'll still be owned by the developer that went bankrupt 20 years ago. Would we be looking at water owned by the council, or will we be looking at other open water areas within an estate, which can be quite dangerous? Because I've often thought that, if a child was playing and fell in that, it would be quite dangerous, but there's nothing there at all. So are we including those smaller ones within that maybe not be owned by the council, but they are within a housing estate? Thank you.
I guess the answer to that would be, I would like to have the assets in our area, first of all, tracked on our asset database, which is in development, and that's a previous action that is ongoing with a scheduled completion date of August. Reasonably confident that we will have that largely populated, if not fully populated by then. We're going down to litter bins, bus shelters, benches, but actually water courses are already being plotted, and they are sort of quite close to the litter bins as an order of priority. So ultimately we will have a handle on where all of ours are. There will be, I guess, some ratings then of what that water risk looks like, and therefore what our inspection regimes are. And then I guess the policy will also have to try to cover water courses that are not our responsibility if we know whose they are. So obviously the one at Penwitham Factory Lane I'm fairly sure I used to live around that way. That would have been Vernon Carity's, I'm guessing, at one stage. It's under development at the moment. There's going to be houses going on there, but at the meantime, it's just kind of dropped in. And if we had a policy that we knew what we were doing with, we would have just gone, oh, that's what we do. But actually, all we've got is our own arrangements from the neighbourhood's perspective. We've put lifelines up there, and we check we've got access and that no damage occurred, but we can't tell what the reservoir structure's like. So neighbourhoods have a responsibility to an extent, but then so do facilities and the likes as well. So there's other areas within the council that have an interest, as well as the fire service, for example, for additional life-saving measures.
I'll come back. Okay, so we're looking at our own assets, our own first, and then we'll move on to where there could be danger with a pond in the middle of a housing estate, but that might be owned by someone else.
Yeah, if it's in our area, it should be on. It should be on there, but it just perhaps wouldn't be flagged as an asset. It would be a, for example, there's a body of water, query who it belongs to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I looked at this report and I saw your name on every bit, and I thought, this man is going to be so busy. There's just so much, just seems so much to do, and I do wish you the very best of luck with it, I have to say. I'm interested your comment then about water courses. Could you sort of just elaborate on what you mean by a water course?
I'm not going to talk about every single bit of water, if you will, but in our area we have a few rivers around and about that if someone chucks a trolley in it, we'll be expected to retrieve. So open water is a reasonably broad title, if you will. It's not saying it's flowing water, still water, but it's water. So we will endeavour to track it. We're using mapping software, so it's accurate as to what's actually there. That's been a little bit of a hold up, I must say, with the asset tracking, because the mapping software has been offline briefly, and it's back on now. But yeah, we would need to just log what there is, where there is, what access is to it, and what, if the policy will allow, what we are required to do and where our responsibility lies.
The reason I'm asking is that where we live in the Western parishes, there are an awful lot of ditches, and some of them are very deep. And when it rains, some of them are very full. I can't imagine, being able to sort of map that or look after it or even sort of consider how you go about it. There's just so much of it. Sorry, it's just a general.
Yeah, well, hopefully I will get my head around that when I write the policy. But I guess there will be, as you see it, there will be bodies of water that tend to be there. There may be varying levels, different times of the year. But things like storm drains, if you will, that run down the side of roads is going to be the county's issue and possibly the utilities company, for example. So my intention would not be that we're going to track those. My intention is starting point, go to a park. There's 5 bodies of water. That's how big they are. There's a life ring. There's a lifeline. There's a fence. There's a jetty. Plotted. That's medium risk. Next park. Move along that way. We know our housing estates. We're on our housing estate. So the assessor will go wheelie bin, bench, pond, all on the map, how big it is, how much area of grass, etc., and log all that at the same time. Come away. Then I will look to implement the regimes going from there. So really, whatever's there, generally, not occasional.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Angela.
Hi, Barry. So just to seek some advice of what your portfolio is really. So we have a pond in Penwortham that's in the middle of a traditional, long-established housing estate. Nobody knows who owns it. What responsibility would your department have in obviously recognising that it's a large pond and it's on a traditional housing estate? What would you do about that? Would you have the capacity to undertake an investigation to find out who owns it? Because my understanding is that it is not owned or any responsibility for South Ribble Council. So in that case, what responsibilities do you have for that pond, and what can you do, if anything at all, or do you just leave it because it isn't within the ownership of South Ribble?
I'm feeling you might have answered that already, but
I guess the policy, within the policy will be a number of legal requirements. There's one, it would just go out of my head just at the wrong time, but Act from 1970 something or other to do with waterside, I think. So my suggestion would be, if it's not adopted, it'll be probably down to us to do something about it, to put some measures in place, just to not to claim ownership, but to have some diligence to be aware that it's there and try and warn people away from it. I guess if there was anything structurally wrong with it, we're not going to go to that extent. It's going to be looking at it and saying, if a kid was to wander down here and come to harm, have we done enough? And that's about as much as we can do. I'm not sure, truthfully, how far our knowledge of local areas are to know whether or not, because they used to belong to Taylor Wimpey, and there's nothing to suggest it's been adopted by anyone else. So to seek out the answers, if you will, that's probably going to be an after. Please do. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Any other questions, Pete?
Yeah, thank you, Barry. My comment earlier about capacity was simply that I was looking at the amount of stuff, as Margaret has done, and seen how much seemed to be coming your way. Just a broad comment about watercourses. The simple approach is often to see a watercourse as a danger and a health and safety hazard and try and keep people away from it. As I look at the watercourses going down from Buckshaw down to become the Shawbrook, going through Worden, there's places where in Buckshaw behind Waitrose the water sometimes is there and sometimes is not. Sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's wet, like the dikes. Further down there's running water and there's tyres tied to ropes over trees down in the Shawbrook in Buckshaw, which can well be seen as a danger. But there's also an aspect of opportunity in these days of so-called wild swimming. Not in this borough, but the former quarry at Eccleston Delph is now a swimming centre. What would once have been seen as a dangerous place to be is actually seen as an opportunity. So I'm hoping as you develop policy, you would also look at opportunity as well as danger.
Yes, again, I think I'd like this policy to be a really good gold standard. Whether it does enough, I don't know, but ultimately we will see. I'm gonna take as much reading of the subject as I can. I'm going to check the acts that are contained within there to know what our responsibilities are, and try to put a policy together that I'm happy to stand behind. And in terms of, as I said before, really there's kind of three parts to this. So although there's 12 elements to it, a lot of them are related, if you will, and some of the work's already ongoing. Conscious also that I'm also still trying to finish off the waste actions as well, from which you'll have had the pleasure of reading last time, because it was, quite comprehensive. And quite a lot of actions have been worked through. Then there's still got to finish off. So still working to the timescales of completing that element of it as well. But this also has some priorities we need to get onto.
Thank you for that. Any further questions on that one? I must say it's a pretty erroneous task you've got there, but maybe the council can help by cancelling your holidays and making. But yeah, but thank you very much. Bill, nothing to ask? No. Are we going to talk about GDPR at this time as well? Yes. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm here as the Council's Data Protection Officer, in addition to Monitoring Officer and Director of Governance. And so I have responsibility for the implementation of the GDPR regime within the council. So members, I hope will have had a chance to read through the report. A little bit frustrating, I think, is the starting point for me, in that you will see in the report, it does make comment that there are a comprehensive suite of policies, but I think where the auditors identified issues is around the implementation of those policies and then maintaining an adequate review process of them. And you can see examples of that where there's clearly been changes taken within teams to something like data retention periods, because they don't match up between the local policy and the central document. But there's been no control over those changes that have taken place. And what that means is that they are acting differently in how they're treating data, if they're recording it at all, to the policy they're supposed to be working to. So there are a number of actions that have been identified within the report, and they're contained at pages 100 onwards. So there's 5 in all. So the first one is to re-establish an ownership of GDPR within the council, because I think it's acknowledged that there's some of the issues that are the responsibility of the data protection officer. There's an overlap in some respect with the operation of the senior information reporting officer, who's the CIRO, who's responsible for data security. So we're looking to re-establish the Information Security Council, and the terms of reference have been redone for that group, and that is now ready to meet. They will then take ownership of the monitoring of GDPR within the council, so there will be reports from the oddly called Data Owners Group, which acronym is DOG, which I think we'll have to change, to be honest. But they will be invited to report into, well, they'll be directed to report into the Information Security Council, the monitoring that's been undertaken with evidence to support that monitoring. It will also receive and consider proposed changes to policy, so that we have that kind of record and control over that process. It'll also look at compliance with the retention periods and data use. So that's the completion of the ROPA document you've seen mentioned within the report, and also to receive reports from the ICO. So there will be this central body now, and this is to avoid any potential things that do fall between the CSIRO and the DPO role, where I think Asim's doing it and Asim thinks I'm doing it, but we will get brought together to make sure that doesn't happen. The second one was to do with refreshing the suite of policies. Now, it does recognise that there were policies, but they did need to be updated. That's actually been implemented. So those policies have already been presented to the senior management team and adopted, so that one of the management actions is complete. The data management policies and other associated data, this is raising awareness of the policy. So obviously, because we've updated them, the next process is to take them and make sure the council officers are aware of them. And you'll see there that we'll be doing that through use of the senior leadership team, who are the service leads, who are responsible for compliance within their services, and also through core briefs. Where we haven't quite moved on is the dedicated page on the intranet, but that is something that will be picked up and developed, because there's I think, what do they call it, a beta test page for the intranet, which we're looking to implement over the summer. This is something that was mentioned earlier on in the meeting about mandatory training. And again, the rates are not where we would like them to be. 47% at South Ribble and 71% at Chorley. I don't disagree with these rates, but these were a little bit surprising. The regime in South Ribble was introduced in 2019. And I'm aware at that time there was a comprehensive training programme offered to all staff. Now, obviously that should have been maintained, so the rates are disappointing, but we are working on ensuring, this is one of the things that's being monitored, the completion of mandatory training in more detail. So there is I don't want to say just a push on getting people to do the training, but we are going to be, as part of the Information Security Council's work, is holding services to account where the training is not where it should be. And then there's then the privacy notices. So there's two documents that we use in relation to data use. One is the data use policy. The other one is a public facing document, which is the privacy notice. And each team is supposed to have an up-to-date privacy notice. So we are making sure that these have been reviewed, and SMT has had this report these actions presented, and already committed to reviewing the privacy notice and making sure it's updated. Last two, the ROPA and asset registers. So these two are kind of interconnected. The register of processing activity, although this report is specific to data deletion, the register is actually a register of all processing activity. So each time data is processed that's held by the council is processed in some way, so used, it should be recorded on a minimum of a quarterly basis. So what categories of data have been used in the previous quarter and for what purposes, and that wasn't happening. And in particular, the data deletion side, which is one of the key focuses of the GDPR, we weren't recording it. And that's not to say that the data wasn't being deleted, because I think some teams were doing so, but the ROPA was not being completed. Now, this could be tied in to the next point, which is people didn't know where the register of processing activity actually was. So it was formerly on the intranet. There have been changes to that form of access for staff, and it wasn't there anymore. So again, this is something that's going to be worked through under the new intranet system to make sure that the ROPA is available. I think it's recognised that the actual form of the ROPA was correct and compliant with the ICO. It just wasn't available for people to actually complete in there, and it wasn't being completed. So the other document that wasn't there was the Information Asset Register, and that again will be published. But again, staff were keeping details of information locally, but it wasn't always being updated. There was, as I say, a comprehensive piece of work done when this regime was implemented, and it doesn't feel a long time ago, 2019, but it is now. And again, it wasn't being reviewed and updated. So actions are going to be taken to make sure these issues are addressed. And I think the important thing is that there's clear ownership of it now with the Information Security Council. So the timescales you'll see for the implementation are actually pretty short. All of the actions will be implemented by September 23 or before. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Chris, for that. Questions, please. None? Julie.
Thank you. I think at the last meeting, we talked about the fact that we'd had limited status on a number of reports over the last 12 months. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen as many limited reports. And I thought that was it. And then tonight we get 2 more, which I seriously find quite disturbing, that we're down to 47% of people actually participating in the mandatory training. I remember doing it myself, and it was, well, to be quite honest, it quite gave me the scares, because if you don't do this and you don't do that, somebody will report you somewhere, and everybody's got to do it, and you've got to be clear on what you ask somebody and how you report this and that. And the fact that we've slipped down to 47% of people actually doing it, I find really very disturbing, as I say. It is what it is at this moment in time. And yes, you have got quicker timescales on it, but there's 2 more reports in the pipeline now. There's the planning and assets, and there's ICT, and I begin to wonder what's going to come out of those 2 in the next few months. I hope we're going to be better, and I hope that this is the last of the limited ones, because really the trend, when you look at them, is going up and not down. It was 3 last year and it's 4 this year. So I would have liked to seen it going the other way. I don't think there's a lot you can say about this. It's another bad report for what is going on in this council, and it really needs to improve. It really does. And I'm grateful to Audit for being so frank and actually saying it how it is. And you certainly haven't sugarcoated it. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do here.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, but at the same time, I think we've got to satisfy ourselves that we are going in the right direction, and we are confident that things are going to improve, and I think that's the key to it. Chris?
No, thanks for saying that, Chair. But I don't disagree with what Councillor Smith said either, because it isn't good reading, and it is disappointing. I think they are relatively straightforward fixes, which makes it even more frustrating, because in acknowledging that there is a comprehensive suite of policies, it acknowledges we are trying to do the right things. I think where I can't disagree with you. It is disappointing and frustrating. I am by nature optimistic, so I am trying to look at the ways that the management actions are very sensible. And they're very frank and they're very fair, and providing we can implement them, and and we'll come on to the AGS later, but it's around making sure we're embedding this culture where we don't just have a policy, but the policy is there to be used and the policy is there to be followed. And it's not just something that is in the IT system in the ether. We're actually using it for the right reasons, not because potentially we're afraid of the consequences of GDPR, but this is the right way to manage information. The purpose of the GDPR regulations was to put the information, the security of the information held for individuals held at the centre of what we do, and that's the purpose of it. And the compliance with the policy enables us to demonstrate we are doing that. So that's, like I say, I do get really frustrated with it because I know Kevin, when he was here, Kevin Conway did an awful lot of work in getting the environment correct and doing the training. So you look at those figures and you do wonder how, really.
On that comment, and I appreciate all that you said, Mr. Moister, I do. But I think the sad part about it is, unlike with the water, there isn't a policy, and therefore you can understand things have gone awry a little bit. But those policies were put in place so comprehensively. The fact that the comment, I think, is here, the practice that they've waned. The appetite for it has waned. I don't know how you can enthuse people when it's waned to that degree. It seems such a funny word to use, but I understand what you're saying. And trying to revive it and get them G'd up again, it's not going to be easy.
May I? Sorry, I'm just wondering on that subject when you're talking about the percentage of. Is that percentage of overall training or percentage of GDPR you were talking about?
It is the GDPR training.
I was just trying to check my plan because there was one of the actions from the waste, obviously from the internalisation of the waste service, that we were surviving, if you like, on existing procedures, protocols that came from the contractor. So workforce of towards 60 who have no training records effectively with the council. We're starting from scratch. So the plan, therefore, is that there was en masse training. So various people from the council will come in early in the morning to do a group session of training about, for example, GDPR would be one. Business planning, the key subjects that are on the mandatory training list are done in the group environment. And I just would wonder whether or not GDPR, if I could find a plan, the GDPR may still be yet to do. So if you just crack off 60 people in June, that's going to hopefully push that up. So if it is still outstanding, it may be, if you take the waste team out of it, the figure's possibly better than that. But just a thought.
Thanks, Barry. It's nice of you to say, but the reality is that the figures are what they are. And it's great for you to say we might be able to pick those off. But let's face it, and this is not having a go at anyone, but waste was insourced last year. So it's been, 8, 9, 10 months. And that's just that use of the word wane. Yeah. So we can't sugarcoat it. I'm not trying to pretend we're somewhere where we're not. I think what I'm just trying to say is we do have a plan to get better. And that's where we are at the moment. And I think you're exactly right with the phrase you use, which is it's right not to sugarcoat it, and we are where we are. There's going to be a lot of trying to embed these processes over the next 12 months and 24, 36 months. It's not an overnight thing.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll keep doing the work, remain positive, and keep looking at it and see how we get on. Are there any other questions for this report? No, nothing. Thank you very much, Dawn. This is just for noting, isn't it? So noted. And as soon as that one went really well, I thought that was a great debate. Would you like to deliver the next one as well? To the internal audit effectiveness review.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as an internal audit service, we have to comply with the public sector internal audit standards and the local government application note. The purpose of this is so that you can have assurance that the opinion we give you can place reliance on. So by conforming with the standards, you know that the work that we do is compliant with the standards, and therefore you can place reliance on the opinion that we give. So every year we have to carry out a self-assessment. And as the report says, there are 130 different aspects of conformance which we need to comply with. This is not just about our documentation, it's about, there are a number of attribute standards as well. So that sets out our behaviour, whether we can demonstrate we're independent, we're objective. But also it looks at our processes and our documentation. The purpose is so that another auditor coming in from outside could look at our documentation and reach the same conclusions that we do based on the evidence that we have. So as paragraph 11 says, there are 135 aspects of the standards, of which we fully conform for 129. There are 5 which are not applicable, and we've got 1 area in which we've identified as an area of improvement, and that's also detailed in the annual governance statement. As it is a self-assessment, once every 5 years we have to have this externally verified. We're part of a Lancashire-wide peer review, and that peer review is due to start in June. They'll come in, so we're other heads of audit from within Lancashire will come in, they'll look at all our documentation, but they also carry out interviews of senior officers and the chair of the governance committee to ascertain the value that we're providing as well, and making sure that we are adding value to the organisation and that we are focused on the right areas. So I've attached our quality assurance and improvement programme, which sets out how we review ourselves and includes details of the assessment. Also attached the checklist of the 135 different areas which we need to conform by, and the action plan. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dawn. Only 1 partial, that's not bad, is it? Any questions? Yes, Mark?
Well done, Dawn. Even doing it for 135 questions, I think you need a medal. But well done. And I'm sure when the auditors do arrive, they're from Blackburn, you said, Wyre and Burnley. I'm sure they'll find everything in order. So you look like you're well on your way to getting a gold star with that one. So well done.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Very positive. Any other questions or? Yeah. Yes, indeed. I was being a bit facetious, I do apologise. Any other questions? None? This one is also just for noting, isn't it? Is it for noting? Yep. Duly noted. So we get on to the AGS. Is this one for you, Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Thank you, members of the committee. You have before you the draft annual governance statement, which forms part of the council's statement of accounts document. This is our annual snapshot assessment of the operation of the council's governance framework. It is in a form familiar to members who've sat on the committee before. What it does is it takes you through in the introduction what the purpose of the document is and what we look at in pulling it together. The second section on page 165 of the agenda is just defining what corporate governance is, and it does so by reference to the SIP for Solace framework document which we've mentioned before, which is the try and find what it's actually called. Damn it, I can't find what it's actually called. But it's the framework document from 2016. Thank you, Dawn. Delivering good governance. I'm expecting them to refresh it imminently because it's been 7 years since it was redone. So we'll hopefully have a different name for you next year. Section 3 of the report, 166, is just the council's governance framework. So these are the systems, processes, cultures and values that set out how the council delivers good governance within that framework. And there is a slight mention for the last time on page 167 around the pandemic, because that obviously had an impact for the council in that period. It was just acknowledging that the standing orders changes that were implemented during the pandemic period are going to be reversed. So section 4 at page 168 is how we review the effectiveness of the governance framework. So it's the different groups and individuals and teams within the council who have a role in reviewing and monitoring the impact of the effectiveness of the governance framework, the operation of those policies and processes. Your good selves are first on the list of governance committee, and I'm not trying to do that to curry favour with you, but obviously you're the key group of members who are assessing this. But you'll see within it the other ways that we seek to monitor how we comply with our policies, and you'll see included in there is things like member training, the management team, the leadership team, and then the specific statutory officers and their roles. The key section I want to take you to, though, starts at page 173, and this is the narrative and the actions that we're proposing in relation to issues that have been highlighted in the last 12 months. So the narrative does seek to address some of the matters that have been discussed this evening to do with previous internal audit reports. But it also recognises some of the things that have been highlighted outside of those reports. So there is mention of the service assurance statements, which is one of our forms of assurance, where there's some areas corporately of failure to comply with policies, so similar issues to those raised with the GDPR review. So they're addressed in the management actions as well. The first table, which you see at page 174, are the actions from last year. And you'll see that whilst there are some outstanding, some have been completed, and the ones that are outstanding have been carried forward to be delivered this year. As with last year, we've grouped the actions together into themes to process systems, staff development, corporate improvements. In a departure from last year, I've been a bit more critical, and rather than just highlighting areas for improvement, we've identified areas of failings now, and this is a recognition of the consequences of the matters that have been raised tonight. And I'm not saying direction of travel, but there has certainly been more serious issues raised this year, and I think that needs to be recognised. And for each of those failings, there is a suggested method of improvement, although not specific actions, just the proposal for how this is going to be addressed by the council. This is only in draft form at the moment. There are some other matters that we're picking up with external audit, which may influence the recommendations the content of this document, and it will be represented to members with the statement of accounts in final form when that's for approval. But I'm happy to take any questions on the document as it currently stands, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris. And we'll see if we've got any questions for you. Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. It's just a general question for understanding, really. So on page 177, it talks about mandated training models to be completed in full. I'm just curious about, so that lists out the enhanced training to be provided on procurement. So is that all staff need training on procurement? No.
No, it will be enhanced training provided to people who have significant or need for it in relation to procurement. One of the reports that was presented to committee this year did highlight issues with compliance with the contract procedure rules of the council. Now, this was by 2 senior members of staff, so it's recognised that this needs to be improved. We've got a number of new starters who would have corporate responsibility for procurements at service lead level. So it's important that we make sure that the council's contract procedure rules and legal obligations in relation to procurement are picked up, and that training is provided to them in a more detailed way. Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Any other? Peter, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was only a small thing. There's one of these sections where I think it's stated that managers will be, or directors will be held to account. And then I just thought it would be good to put it in the agreed audit actions. I think it was Councillor Smith before mentioned that the percentages of actions undertaken was quite low. I think it was about 64%. And the current action just says improved percentage implementation rates. But I think one of the other comments was that does it have the teeth? And I think if we're holding directors to account on the implementation of actions, I think the other one was the wording was taken from mandatory training. So I think if that possibly should be put across, because when reading it, I think it just gives it a bit of teeth, and that directors need to actually get those actions done rather than let them wane, to use a word that was used before. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, fine. Thank you. It does reference, I think, at page 177 around mandatory training modules, corporate governance group to review and hold directors to account. So this is the way we're going to be approaching this. Is the directors and service leads will be, again, I'll say invited, to be polite, to attend the committee and report where, when we're doing our reviews, those figures aren't at the appropriate levels. So that's the method they're going to be held to account, is by reporting into the corporate governance group.
Yeah,
it was just, thank you, Chair. It was just a query. I've got it down as page 15. It's under corporate complaints, local ombudsman. I'm just wondering, the last sentence of the paragraph there says that the council are aware of 6 complaints which were made to the local government ombudsman. Could you give us an example of what type of complaints were being made to the local government ombudsman?
I don't have that information to hand. The reason for including it is to provide high level assurance to members that if you're getting something wrong, one of the ways to demonstrate it is that people are complaining about your performance and that those complaints are being upheld. So the local government ombudsman is a good litmus test, external litmus test of how the council are complying, because the ombudsman will look at how we are performing our duties, and quite harshly in many respects, because they always seem to want to favour that the complainant is in the right. Sorry, that's a very council officer point of view. But that's the purpose of including it. I can certainly get you the information if it's something you're interested in, but I think the point is that there's quite relatively few complaints and even fewer that have been upheld. So the approach of the council is largely being supported by the ombudsman.
So am I right in thinking that the complaint goes to stage 1, and then if the complainer suspects that it isn't being dealt with, then it goes to the local government ombudsman? Is that correct? Is that the stage 2?
No, stage 2 is there's an internal process for stage 2 where it gets escalated to the director or to a senior member of staff, and if the member of the public is still not satisfied, then they're entitled to go to the local government ombudsman. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm on page 17. These pages are unbelievable, the way they're numbered. 3 lots of supplements, all different numbers. Yeah. Well, mine was the one that came as
Go on,
bits.
yeah.
So we've got the government's environment area to strengthen. And I'm glad here that you've actually mentioned that we have had a difficult year, because I think that is only honest. And the fact that that contractor really, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, things were very serious on that one. And it did need highlighting. So I think it's right that we do highlight these things. It's good to highlight what we're doing well, but it's also good to recognise that we're not always as good as we think we are. Page 11, the end of the pandemic. We discussed this at the task group. And I was of the opinion that originally, before the pandemic, relating to the attendance of the public, and it was also members, because members at the moment are being restricted as well. And I thought that it was actually taking away all the restrictions as regards members of the public and members of the council.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm happy to change that. Yeah, it's just taking us back to the pre-pandemic position.
Yeah, it is. It should mention.
Yeah, when I was putting the document together, this was in my mind around transparency and decision making. So it was around the public participation side, which was the point I was trying to make. But you're absolutely right. It does include going back to the full pre-pandemic position of member engagement as well.
Let's just make one other observation. That we've put this in the governance statement, and we're going to take it to council and all that sort of thing to revert back to what we were doing pre-pandemic. And yet, last week at council, we actually changed the committees by just saying, let's waive standing orders. I don't think that's right. If we've got a governance, a constitution, I think the constitution should actually be looked at by the task group. And if we're going to change things, the task group should actually debate it like we're doing at the moment about the planning committee and all the other things. And that task group is working quite well. There's good ideas coming out of it. And I don't think we should just suddenly waive standing orders to do something. It's just my observation of that. Thank you. And thank you for indulging me in that.
You're welcome. I think there was exceptional circumstances in that one, Lord. Would you like to reply on that, Chris? Or?
There is provision to waive standing orders if it's needed. I don't think the situation will arise again, but
any further questions on this item? Yes, Wesley.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, you stole my thunder, Chris and Councillor Brereton. We were talking about the local ombudsman, but I was glad to see that the corporate complaints had gone down by 10%, and that the ombudsman didn't uphold any many appeals or complaints. It shows the system's working, which is, credit to the officers at the council. So that's really good. I had two little questions. One, which is, I'm sure you would never categorise services for business continuity purposes A and B into the wrong type of category. But it'd be just really nice when that work's taking place to have a look at what services go into category A and what services go into category B, just in case there's any contention amongst members. And then the second one was just about the work that's kind of didn't get done this year, but is going into next year's plan around developing the council's approach to fraud. So I know that it didn't go ahead because the neighbouring borough didn't have an officer available to do the work. So I just checking if that occurred again. Is there a plan to make sure the work goes ahead from our side?
Yeah, in terms of that, we're already in discussion with them, so it can go ahead.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Sorry. Who's leading on the business continuity stuff of categorising? Sorry, Dawn.
So the categorisation list was developed with directors, and then it went to senior management team for approval, and the senior leadership team as well. So everybody had a chance to contribute and make sure that they felt their service was in the right category.
Yes. No further questions? Nothing from Phil? No, obviously not. Sorry, could I have a proposal, please?
Sorry, I don't think we need to vote on it because it's only presented in draft form on this occasion. I think when it comes back, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That one done. Move on to item 9. George, you've been sitting there waiting patiently. Thank you very much for that. Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our regular progress report with a sector update as well. So just really update you on the progress of the external audit. So in terms of 22-23, so it's page 18 on the supplementary agenda and page 184 on the combined agenda that I'm starting from. So it's headed up progress at May 2023. So we've started our planning for the audit, and the audit plan is actually the next item on this agenda. So I'll go through that when we get to that. We'll report our findings from the financial statements audit. We're aiming for the end of November on that one. Then there's a bit of background about what's happened over the last kind of year or two in terms of kind of the movement of the kind of target dates for the audit, the accounts, because of kind of the impact of the pandemic. So this year it's actually reverted to kind of, the kind of deadlines it was pre-pandemic. So around kind of the end of May for the production of draft accounts and the end of September for the audit of those accounts. However, there are still kind of ongoing impacts, whether from the pandemic, the complexity of accounting requirements that are now required for the accounts, and just really kind of, the capacity to do all that in that kind of quite a finite window of time. So we've been in discussion with officers in the finance team. They've agreed that they will aim to get us the financial statements for the end of July, beginning of August, and we will commence the audit then. That obviously means it won't meet a September deadline, but we are aiming for the end of November, as I said. Excuse me, I've got a slight frog in my throat. In terms of the value for money work, so again, members who've been on the committee previously may recall that the National Audit Office uncoupled, if you like, the value for money work from the financial statements work. So the requirement is to deliver value for money work within 3 months of the opinion being issued on the financial statements. So in terms of the 21-22, we have issued a draft auditor's annual report to officers for discussion. Out of those discussions came some additional issues that we do need to look at, but we're working with senior officers on those issues. So obviously we want to kind of report comprehensively to include those. So we're aiming, so that report is in draft. We just need to do a bit more work on those issues, and then we aim to bring it to the next committee. Over the page, it just says the other areas that we look at, so certification of claims. So we're working on the 21-22 housing benefit claim, and we are aiming for the end of this month to sign that off. We continue to meet with kind of finance officers and senior officers, including your chief executive, just to make sure that we are appraised of any kind of emerging issues and the kind of challenges facing the council. The following page has about some information about audit fees. So we signed the 21-22 financial statements audit towards the end of March, and there are additional fees now due for that audit. So we've set them out in detail for you so that you can look at those. So again, people who've been on the committee previously might recall that for the first time in 21-22, there was group accounts prepared for the council to include the leisure company. So that's obviously kind of quite a substantial bit of additional work in terms of us giving an opinion on the consolidated financial statements as well as the single entity statements, so the council plus the group statements. So there's an additional charge for that. There's also infrastructure assets. So again, there was very late guidance came out on that in December from SIPVA due to kind of issues that have been previously raised nationally. So because of that additional guidance that came out in December, we had additional work to do on infrastructure assets in order to obtain the right assurance to kind of sign off the accounts. There was various kind of issues around pensions, really kind of because of that combination of subsidiary company into the council's accounts. So again, quite a complex area, bringing in kind of the pensions of the leisure company in terms of that consolidation. There were some kind of issues around kind of land and buildings, assets not revalued in the year, and kind of related to technical accounting kind of requirements and adjustments in relation to that. And also in terms of kind of, because of some of the complexity of the estimation uncertainty, because of those valuations, we did need to consult with our own internal property expert, just again to get some assurance about those assumptions and the key inputs into those valuations. So that's the kind of areas that those additional fees relate to as well, just set out there for you. The next page just sets out the deliverables for 22-23. So you can see, as I said, the audit plan's the next item, and then you can see kind of those November dates for the other reports and opinions. And then the remainder of the report is a sector update, just kind of various reports and information that might be of interest to members. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Do we have any questions for Georgia? Yes.
Is that what I gather? Because I got value for money in audit fees.
Yeah, that might be
in number 10.
Yeah. Yeah.
The value for money. Originally, it was supposed to be in September, and then it went to January, and then it went to May. Now we're in May, and I've got one side of an A4, which says our risk assessment, and they haven't found any weaknesses, but however, we will need to update our risk assessment once we've finalised our work. So we still haven't got the proper value for money paperwork, have we?
That's correct.
I read this with interest and thought, nothing here.
So I'll just go through if that's okay, and also for the benefit of obviously members who've not been on the committee before. So originally, before the pandemic hit, the deadline was September 22. Then when the pandemic hit, the government brought in legislation and changed the deadline for the audit of financial statements to November 22. So actually the original deadline was November 22 because the legislation changed it to that. So it was due in November 22 in terms of financial statements and value for money. However, then because of kind of the pressures on both auditors and on local authorities, the National Audit Office kind of decoupled the work, as I said. So the aim was to deliver the value for money within 3 months of signing the audit opinion. So the financial statements audit, for some of the reasons I've just explained in terms of extra fee, took longer than anticipated, especially because of the late guidance around infrastructure assets and the complications on the valuations and the pension liability and the group accounts. So we actually signed, I think it was the 22nd of March, a financial statements audit. Now, we do prioritise that a little bit over the value for money work, because obviously the council wants to know its financial position, because it's very important to know the accounts are, the opinion is a clean opinion to be able to kind of plan going forward. So actually, because we signed that March 22, under the National Audit Office rules, the deadline for delivering the value for money is actually, we signed it March 23. I do apologise, I'm getting my years mixed up. So then 3 months after that is June 23. So that's kind of the first part of it. So actually we are technically within that time scale. But I'll also explain why it is taking so long as well, because I do think, that's important. So most of the value for money work was completed and the report was drafted in January, towards the end of January. Now you'll recall that in the January committee, internal audit brought a report on Commercial Service Directorate and the procurement issues there. So at that point, I could not issue that report because we had to look into those findings ourselves and satisfy ourselves about whether there was anything additional to report, if we had any kind of, additional views on it. So that's the work that's been going on since then. So that work was completed towards the end of April, and then we have certain internal processes to go through to ensure kind of consistency of reporting. And the draft report was shared with officers on the 10th of May. So that's why kind of the progress report says it's been shared, because it was shared with officers on the 10th of May. Now, we met with officers last week to discuss that report with a view to it coming to this committee. And as Chris mentioned earlier, there's been some additional issues we've been potentially alleged, and we're working kind of with senior officers again to get to the bottom of that. So I can't issue that report till I have satisfied myself that we have covered all issues that need potentially reporting to yourselves as those charged with governance. So although the report is sat there in draft, there's now additional things that we need to look at before I can issue that report to you. So that's what we're doing at the moment. So I appreciate the delay is not ideal, but also from my point of view, I don't want to issue a report that is not fully comprehensive, and I can only kind of deal with things as they are brought to my attention. So again, we're working with officers, and I anticipate bringing that report to the next committee meeting once we've done that additional bit of work, which I don't think will be a substantial piece of work, but does need doing before I finalise that report. So I hope that kind of, I say, less than ideal, but gives you a bit of context as to why it's not come to the committee yet.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive explanation. I'm pleased you've been looking at that report, because it was concerning to us all, and we did feel that external audit should have a view on it when we read it. So it will be interesting to see how you've viewed that particular issue. One of the reasons I asked is I'd be failing in my duty to our past colleague, Councillor Ogilvie, who had a think about it, hadn't arrived. So that's one of the reasons I've asked. I have just one more question, if I may. Two, actually. The group audit procedure for the fees, which is 4,500, that incorporates the South Ribble Leisure, does it? So the fees, the company stands alone as South Ribble Leisure. The fees that are charged there are 4,500. Are part of the fees, or are they their part of the fees, and will they be paid by them? How does it work? Because we get very little information about South Ribble Leisure here, and I do think it's something that we, as a governance committee, should have more information about. But I'd like to know where those fees are going to land at, please. And could you also give me some information about what is this infrastructure fee that you've actually popped on here? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So in terms of the group accounts, so we do not audit the leisure company. We audit the transactions included within the council's accounts. So because the council has to consolidate in the leisure company, they have to bring in the transactions of the company. So you'll have the council accounts, and then you'll have group accounts attached to them, which incorporate those transactions. So what we're looking at is how the council has incorporated those transactions into their consolidated accounts. And that includes things like the actual consolidation process, that the council's assessment of what is material and whether that's kind of, in line with our assessment of what's material, how those transactions are brought in. And then last year, my understanding is correct, and hopefully Louise will jump in if I've misremembered, but the company was too small to need an actual Companies Act audit. So what we did is we did do some testing of the income and expenditure transactions that were brought into the council's consolidated accounts. So we don't literally audit the company, but we audit the kind of transactions and how they've been brought into the council's group accounts, if you like. I hope I've explained that okay. I think I might have been able to be a bit clearer, but hopefully that's, yeah. And then the infrastructure assets. So on the council's balance sheet, they have, land and buildings, plant and equipment, IT, and have infrastructure assets. And usually that's things like pavements, doesn't tend to be kind of roads, because the kind of county tends to kind of do highways, but it might be kind of pavements and other maybe street lights and things like that. So that's what we call infrastructure assets. So historically, they've kind of just been held at cost sort of thing, rather than kind of being sort of valued in depth sort of thing on an ongoing basis, and kind of the accounting's been kind of quite basic for them. So this has been picked up as a national issue last year. And it's been kind of looked at in depth by CITFA and the different auditor firms who audit kind of local government. And it was decided that actually a different way of looking at it was required, a different way of auditing, and a different disclosure as well was required within the accounts. So that was last year. CITFA kind of sent out the guides to say, actually, you need to go and look at your infrastructure assets and look at the disclosures. And they kind of put a sort of a kind of not a temporary measure, because it will be the same going forward, but they've tried to kind of do it as best they could, because to try and unpick years and years and years and years of these infrastructure assets going back ad infinitum would have been quite difficult. So they've come to kind of some guidance, and the council had to kind of implement that, and then we had to audit that to make sure that it had been complied with and we were satisfied with the figures in the accounts and disclosures. And that will be kind of ongoing this year as well, to kind of make sure that that is still in place and it's still being adhered to. So it's kind of an additional piece of work that we've not had to do previously for the council. And it's kind of as well, your infrastructure assets are just kind of like 2 times our materiality. So actually the amount of work we've had to do is not as much as some of the bigger councils whose infrastructure assets are many times the auditor's materiality. So actually that fee is lower than you'll see at some of the other councils.
Thank you for that. So any further questions on that item? Shall we just move on to item 10? And yeah, that's fine. Put your mic on, please.
Sorry, I do apologise. So item 10 is our audit plan for the 22-23 financial statements, so year ending 31st of March 2023. So page 33 of the supplement pack is where I'm starting, which is page, bear with me, 199 of the combined pack. It's headed up key matters. So that's just really just a bit of kind of general background in terms of the current kind of, the current kind of situation within local government, the pressures on it, which I'm sure kind of everyone's already really aware of. And the following page is just kind of our responses around our commitment to quality and the other things that we consider in terms of kind of your arrangements and, anything we've identified previously. So it's just background really. And then the following page has kind of introduction and headlines. So that's just setting out our responsibilities and the scope of the audit. Again, nothing kind of changed from previous years. The next page sets out the significant risks we've identified, and the following pages go into each of those risks in a little bit more detail. Just again, that we are expecting to kind of do a group audit this year. Our materiality levels are set out, so the levels that we're working to in terms of the audit, and just kind of some other kind of information in terms of new auditing standards and logistics and the proposed fee. So the rest of the audit plan goes into all of those things in a little bit more detail. So I'll just quickly kind of go through it and then take questions if that's okay. But really, so the next part goes into the significant risks identified. Again, so these significant risks, pretty common across local government, nothing in terms of kind of something that's really specific to this council. So nothing kind of out of the ordinary there in terms of those risks. Risk of fraud in terms of revenue recognition, that's a mandated risk we have to consider, but we can rebut it. So because the income streams of the council are fairly kind of well known, there's no kind of like, odd income generation streams that we wouldn't be expecting. And also kind of just because of the policies in place at the council, we've rebutted that risk. That doesn't mean we don't kind of test those areas. It just means we're not kind of doing like work over and above what we'd normally do to kind of sample and test those transactions, and similar underneath for expenditure recognition as well. Following page, management override controls, that's a mandatory risk for all audits, whether public sector or commercial, and that concentrates really on kind of the potential of where accounts could be manipulated if that was the case, and usually that's through journals, because that's what moves the transactions around the accounts. So we look at journals, and we also look at estimates and judgments, and just look at there's been any kind of changes in those key areas. Again, the next couple of significant risks, again, things that have been mentioned previously and that you'd expect. So the value of the defined benefit pension fund net liability. Again, it's an estimate, although you have an expert actuary to do it. There's a lot of assumptions that go into it. So we have to satisfy ourselves that those assumptions are appropriate. And we look at the kind of competence and independence of the actuary. We have our own expert who looks at the different actuaries and gives us some assurance on that. And also we attain some assurances from the auditor of Lancashire Pension Fund, who is also Grant Thornton, but obviously it's a different team kind of undertakes that. Valuation of lands and buildings and investment properties, again, kind of, key estimate within the accounts, some complex inputs sometimes. So again, it just sets out how we're going to kind of look at that risk and the work that we will do to kind of gain assurance around that. Next page just sets out the group audit scope, nothing there changed. Again, you know, that key management overrider controls. And then because the key figures in the leisure company being consolidated, the pension liability, then again, we'll look at those being the kind of pension report and the figures being brought in. Just some of the matters that come within the scope of our kind of audit, the progress against prior year recommendations. So we will follow them as part of this year's audit. That's the most efficient way to do it. Couple of pages about our approach to materiality, just giving you a bit more information about that. IT strategy, that has changed because of the following page explains changes to auditing standards. So again, that's around kind of the test of kind of IT controls. Value for money. So again, as Councillor Smith pointed out earlier, so we are going to update our risk assessment for 22-23 once we have finalised that 21-22 report. So the things coming out of that report will be picked up in 22-23, and we will bring a supplementary audit plan with that kind of information in as well. So you know the work that we're going to do for 22-23. Just some information around logistics, and then fees, which we've discussed in part already. So happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Georgia. Do we have any questions for Georgia? Further questions? None? Oh, answered them all earlier. In that case, this one is for decision, is it not? Can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Peter. Seconder? Margaret? Are we all in agreement? Are we all accept? Yeah? No abstentions? No. Good. Thank you very much for that. Is the closure of dormant bank account decision. This is straightforward. Is Louise, you want to very quickly explain, such as you know what?
Thank you, Chair. Yep. So one of the external audit recommendations coming forward was a review of our bank reconciliation process and review of our bank accounts, which we have undertaken. In the process of doing so, the identification of the bank account that hasn't been utilised for several years and has just been stood dormant, and the signatories to that account have all since left the organisation. So in order to close that account and be able to transfer the money into the more active accounts to be pooled with larger balances and therefore generate a better return of income, that's what we would wish to do. But in order to do that, we need to add myself and Jeannie Woodington onto the mandate and then dissolve the account. And the bank requires us to have a written minute and approval to do so. So that's
Thank you for that. I think there's absolutely no reason to have debate on this one at all, but I do know that Councillor Pullins does have a point.
Yeah, I mean, I understand there's actually 2 points in this. One is to get the money with a proper signatory that is current, which there's no question about. I'm just looking at the risk thing that says point 16, no actioning on the risk request will mean that the money can't be used, clearly. But then earlier on, it says we don't actually know where this money came from and what it's for, effectively.
being set up.
Microphone, please.
Sorry, I think the account was set up several years ago, before all of our times. We haven't got any written documentation to support it. At the time, it would have been, I assume, an account earning a reasonable rate of interest and was put in there. But now we can't access it at all because there's no signatories.
No,
Sorry,
I understand the question about signatories. I'm just a little surprised that we've got money around that we don't know why it was there in the first place. Why was the account set up? And just, I suppose there's a little bit of risk that it could have been set up for some purpose for which the money had to be legally used by us. Does that make sense?
yes. Thank you. There's no documentation that we can find, and we have contacted the bank to try and chase this around. There is nothing to suggest that it is for that purpose. Just that at that time, our understanding is that the account would have been set up as a deposit account to be used for transactions, and it just simply has never been for a period of time.
I think it would have been perhaps better to have a little more specific language than dormant for a number of years, for example. And
Councillor Turner.
Yeah, I'd just like to make an observation to say I'm glad it's only 37,000 and not 3.7 million.
Yep.
So thanks for that, Louise.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we do have to agree to this. Sir? Yeah. Oh, excuse me. So members are asked to approve the addition of signatories as follows. Louise Mattington, Director of Finance, Jean Warrington, Principal Financial Accountant. Could I have a proposal, please? Thank you. Second to Pete. Thank you. Are we all in agreement? We are. Does that mean we're done? Good. Can I thank everybody for attending? Thank officers for your excellent reports. Some great debate as well. And I do hope the new members have enjoyed enough of it to want to come again. Okay. Thank you very much.